The first dawnlight crept over the chandler's stall, illuminating the rows of candles that stood like sentinels, their wicks trimmed and ready. Tova Embergrove stirred, her hands instinctively reaching for the familiar tools of her craft. The air was filled with the sweet scent of melted wax and the earthy smell of the wooden workbench. As she worked, the silence was broken only by the soft crackle of wax and the gentle clinking of metal against metal. A sense of unease settled in the pit of her stomach, like a small stone dropped into a still pond. The morning light poured in, casting long shadows across the room, and Tova felt herself becoming lost in the rhythm of her work. The sound of dripping wax and the creaking of the old wooden floorboards accompanied her movements, a soothing melody that seemed to calm her nerves. But as she glanced at the book that had appeared on her workbench, its cover bearing her name in fresh ink, the sense of unease returned, like a faint hum in the background of her mind. The light danced across the pages, casting a warm glow over the room, and Tova felt a shiver run down her spine as she wondered how the book had come to be there. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, the darkness deepening, like a well that had no bottom. Tova's heart beat faster, her senses on high alert, as she reached out to touch the book, her fingers hesitating over the cover. As Tova delved deeper into the book, she began to notice a strange cadence to the words. They seemed to follow the rhythm of her own work, the ebb and flow of the wax and the wick. It was as if the book was speaking to her, its words weaving in and out of her own thoughts. The room grew quieter, the only sound the soft scratch of the pen on paper and the gentle creak of the wooden workbench. Tova's hands moved of their own accord, the tools seeming to guide themselves as she worked. The air was filled with an almost palpable sense of anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. The words on the page began to shift and rearrange themselves, like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Tova felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that the book was changing, its secrets unfolding before her like a dark flower. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock in the corner of the room. Tova's heart beat faster, her senses on high alert as she turned the pages, the words blurring together in a mad dance. And then, without warning, the room was filled with a sound that should not exist, a tool moving by itself, a door closing in a still room. The sound was like a crack in the fabric of reality, a glimpse into a world beyond the mundane. The presence in the room grew stronger, its power coursing through the air like a dark river. Tova felt herself being drawn into its depths, the words on the page blurring together in a mad dance. The tools on the workbench seemed to stir of their own accord, the wax melting and flowing like a liquid shadow. The air was heavy with an unspeakable horror, a sense of dread that settled in the pit of Tova's stomach like a cold stone. She tried to move, to step back from the workbench, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. The presence closed in around her, its darkness suffocating, like a shroud cast over the room. Tova's heart beat faster, her senses on high alert as she realized that she was trapped, caught in a web of terror from which she could not escape. The words on the page seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. And then, without warning, the room was silent, the presence vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock in the corner of the room. Tova's breath caught in her throat as she realized that she was not alone, that the presence was still out there, waiting for her. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, the darkness deepening, like a well that had no bottom. Tova felt herself being pulled down into the depths of the unknown, where the presence waited, its power growing with each passing moment. The air was thick with tension, the silence of a living thing that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Tova's heart was racing, her senses on high alert, as she waited for the presence to return to claim her as its own. The last page of the book was blank, but warm to the touch, like a summer's day. Tova's mane was fading from the cover, like the ebbing of the tide. She felt a sense of loss, of grief, as she realized that she was coming to the end of her journey. The room was silent, the only sound the soft crackle of the wax and the gentle creak of the wooden workbench. The air was heavy with the scent of melting wax, like the smell of incense in a dark church. Tova's hands moved of their own accord, the tools seeming to guide themselves as she worked. And then, without warning, the room was filled with a soft, golden light, like the dawn breaking over the horizon. The light was warm, comforting, like a mother's embrace. Tova felt herself being drawn to its depths, the darkness receding as the light grew stronger. The last thing she saw was the book, its pages empty, its cover cool to the touch. The chandler's stall was silent at dawn, the work continuing on its own. Olin Embergrove walked in, his eyes scanning the room with a sense of curiosity. He saw the book, its cover blank, its pages empty. He reached out to touch it, feeling a sense of trepidation. The book seemed to wait for him, its secrets unfolding like a dark flower. Olin's heart beat faster, his senses on high alert, as he began to read. The room was filled with the scent of old paper and the musty smell of the wooden shelves. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft creaking of the old wooden floorboards. Olin's eyes scanned the pages, his mind reeling with the implications of what he was reading. The words seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. And then, without warning, Olin felt a sense of unease, a sense of being drawn into a world beyond his own. The darkness seemed to be closing in around him, like a shroud cast over the room. Olin's heart was racing, his senses on high alert, as he realized that he was not alone, that the presence was still out there, waiting for him.